morning, everybody. Happy day 2 of your Advent calendar, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, remember, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to ask yourselves whether working class men are all fine with harassing women. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on what it calls Disaster Chef, the growing scandal about TV presenter Gregg Wallace, which got worse over the weekend when he responded to a series of allegations in a less than ideal way. More on that in a minute. But first, I want to take us to page 23, where I've got a story in the paper. Should be page 1, but it's page 23. Now, viewers of this show will know all about the Nuked Blood scandal, in which troops who took part in Cold War weapons testing were monitored throughout, and their blood tests are no longer to be found in their medical records. Now, that is already the subject of an MOD investigation, a BBC Two documentary, and a new legal case estimated to cost £5 billion. And that is the bottom scale. Now, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, there is now evidence that the MOD continued to monitor these men after they returned home. Now, Jason, I know this isn't your story and you're going to be asking me stuff about it, but you've been around Westminster a lot for many years. You've seen a lot of scandals come and go. Does this one look like it's getting worse to you, or better? I might just make it up.
I don't think it's getting better. I mean, the fact that, thanks mainly to your diligence, Susie, more and more aspects of his story continue to emerge, and the fact that we still haven't got to the full truth of exactly what they knew in terms of when they sent these former service personnel to fly through nuclear dust clouds and therefore get allegedly radiation and therefore the consequences of that. And then how the extent to which they try to cover it up, which seems to be as egregious as the actual kind of act in the first place. That is still, it's you kind of through perseverance, sheer bloody mindedness, but that's in a good way for you. And refusing to let this go is how we're getting closer and closer. Now, you can tell me better than I know, what is the significance of this, the fact that they were continuing to do these tests? Now, can you explain why that matters?
If someone who was involved in nuclear weapons testing, and we're talking about people who didn't just fly through the clouds, but sailed through it, crawled through it, lived in it for up to a year. If they were monitored biologically during that process, that shows duty of care, right? That's what you should do if someone is exposed to radiation. The fact is that if you were doing that for their health and to be good, you would make sure those results were in their medical records and that they had access to them in later years, and you'd tell them about them. You'd also tell them that you were monitoring them. What this particular all the way through, but this particular story, which shows that at least one of those pilots was monitored 11 years afterwards. He was recalled for no reason for another blood test. That's, as he was then, Group Captain Terry Gledhill meeting the Duchess of Kent in 1969. That's 11 years after the bomb tests. And that is the same year that he was called back in for a fresh blood check on the basis that he'd had problems with his blood at Christmas Island and they wanted to compare them. Now that, again, if you are taking care of the troops who are involved, that's a reasonable thing to do. But if this is not in someone's medical records, if it is not something they are told about, if the results of this comparison and the discussion of that comparison are withheld by the scientists and not given to the troops and to their doctors, then it's no longer healthy monitoring of the men for their interests. It's at that point, it becomes human experiments. And that's fundamentally what this scandal is about. The MOD has always said for many years that the troops at these bomb tests were not experimented upon. They're experimenting on the weapons and they were just nearby. But as someone pointed out yesterday, it's really clear if you go back and look at the footage of all these men lined up in the open, as we saw in that BBC Two documentary the other week. Why would you do it? Why would you do that? Why would you march them up to the top deck of the ship so they can watch? Why would you sail them into the fallout afterwards? Why would you make them fly through it? Why would you make them live in it for a year or crawl through it or go and take measurements of it if you're not trying to check them? And it makes perfect sense. At the time, there was, daily fears of nuclear attack or invasion by the Soviets. We needed to know what would happen to healthy people if they were irradiated over a long period of time. So it makes really good sense. The wrong is not letting those people know. And as far as Group Captain Terry Gledhill is concerned, we now know that there were the blood tests that were in his medical records and the blood tests that were withheld by the atomic weapons establishment do not match up. The scientists had more blood tests than his doctors did. And when he had later ill health, it may have changed his diagnosis. It may have changed his treatment. We also know that there were things in his medical records that were falsified. There was false diagnoses he was given, which his medical records show were not correct, that he had tuberculosis, meningitis. Later on, when he got discharged, he never had TB in his body. And also lies about family history that was trying to explain the condition he had, when perhaps you could have explained it by radiation. That would be a reasonable alternative that you would look at as a doctor to consider if you knew he'd been irradiated.
Yeah. And remind me again,
blood test isn't in his file. Why would you?
So remind me again, how many people do we think were affected by this, Susie?
Well, it's Terry's first blood test that exposed the nuke blood scandal 2 years ago. And then we just had this one man who had 7 blood tests. But that memo had an order on it, which traced back to the Air Ministry, which in turn led to other orders in the Navy and in the Army for thousands of people to be blood tested the same way. And many, many veterans say they've experienced the same thing, and it's now not in their medical records. What we have now is one blood test, again, from Terry, that he alone was called in for a check a decade later. But if that was done to him, the chances are the order that was the result of would have applied to at least the other RAF air crews, if not also the ground crews and some of the other services as well. So we're talking hundreds and potentially thousands again. Now, every time, this is the interesting bit, every time I've gone to the MOD or the Atomic Weapons Establishment and said, I found this thing, they say, oh, that's the only one there is. And then I said, well, I found this other thing. And they go, oh, yeah, well, there's that one, but that's the only one there is. And every time I go back to them, you've just found the one needle in the haystack. Genuinely, there isn't anything else. And we've got to the point now, we have 4,000 pages of evidence from the Atomic Weapons Establishment. We have forced declassifications. We've got £5 billion worth bill coming at them. And they're still saying that this test of Terry Gledhill in 1969, well, that's the only one. And what are the chances that that's correct? I'm going to say none.
Yeah. So we haven't yet got the evidence that this was an official kind of program and monitoring of those involved in the
Yeah, we do. We have that during the tests. It was an official program. It was ordered by the Air Ministry, the War Office, and the Admiralty. And we also have in 1959 from the Office of a Junior Minister a special directive to destroy some medical records or dispose of some medical records. What we don't have yet is that this final test in 1969, whether that also applied to other people, but it would not have been done in a massive bureaucracy like the Armed Forces. Would not have been done without an order to it. So it's a case of finding that order and finding out who else was subject to it. Steve says, how high up did this go? Who was responsible for the manipulation of the records? Who knew? And when did they know? My God, Steve, if I knew these answers, we wouldn't still be sitting here. Those are the questions that an investigation or a court needs to decide. But the fact is that whoever started this scandal in the 1950s by doing this stuff, they're probably long gone. But there are civil servants today working in Whitehall who are repeating it, who are upholding it, who are not checking it, who are not opening it, and who are also, therefore, criminally culpable, perhaps. Now, Richard on Facebook says, I don't know what this world is coming to. 70-odd years ago, thousands of young men like me were used as guinea pigs. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Indigenous people who happened to be unlucky enough to live in an area of extreme danger were experimented on by what I would call mindless irresponsibility. But on TV and all over the papers, the news is about a bloke who judges cooking. And a few weeks ago, he's referencing Liam Payne's plummets from a balcony in Argentina. We've had a documentary made about Britain's longest and biggest scandal that resulted in the illnesses, deaths, disfigurements, and unknown illnesses of future children. And what do we get? Couldn't care less attitude from the great British people. Now, he has a bit of a point, I suppose, Jason. The reason why, I should say to Richard, the reason why Gregg Wallace is the main thrust of this particular broadcast is because if I made test veterans the main thrust, we wouldn't get as many viewers. And this way I get to tell more people about you and what happened to you. It's the same principle as selling newspapers. But he's got this point, Jason, about the scandal getting traction with other media. To the rest of Fleet Street, this seems to be something they're happy for the Mirror to run with on its own. Why is that? We're supposed to be really competitive. We don't want other people to get better stories than us. Why? Why? Am I on my own?
I don't know the answer to that question, Susie. So what's the latest in terms of, what the MOD is saying, and whether has there been any change in attitude since we had a Labour government elected or not? Or is it the same?
Well, as you all know, must be everything in Whitehall is under review since the change of government, and those reviews generally don't report back for 6 months. So everything at the moment is just we don't know. And the answer to an awful lot of questions in Parliament, and more so on this one, is we're looking into it. We're going to get to an answer at some point. So if you're trying to pin them down to what they're going to do, it's next to impossible. But the question is, where this goes from here. There's this court case pending. We're uncovering fresh crimes almost every week. I've got to speak to someone this afternoon about some more of them. There's this MOD internal investigation to find out who knows what and how bad it is. But nothing is going to happen with any of these reviews for 6 months, maybe. You're not going to get an answer to anything, are we? I mean, do you think that, I don't think, but John Healey and Keir Starmer can't really afford to sit and wait on this one. If it's 5 billion before Christmas, how bad is it going to be if they let me at this? As soon as they launch their special justice tribunal or a public inquiry, whatever it's going to be, I have to stop. But I keep going until we get to that point, and the Mirror keeps going. So how long do you think they can afford to wait? Can they? I mean, they've obviously got to figure out how bad it is. They can't just call, for compensation on the basis of what I've written, but they've got to have a certain time frame, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, are they stalling for time because of the level of compensation? I mean, you told me recently that, it wouldn't just be UK service personnel. It could be, those in Australia and New Zealand, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and you could end up be looking at aggravated or punitive damages if a judge decides this behaviour has been particularly bad, in which case it starts getting very hairy indeed. I think it's partly financial, but it's also, the Treasury isn't letting anyone spend any money at the moment, are they? So it's very difficult for John Healey, the Defence Secretary, to go to them and ask them to open the checkbook when they don't know how bad it is. I think genuinely it is they really don't know. And the officials that they've asked to go out and find out how bad it is before they can decide what to do, they also don't know. And they're not very good at questioning their own institutions, which we're going to get onto, I'm sure, with Gregg Wallace. But if you're part of an institution, you tend to trust it and trust its processes. And you don't go and scrutinise things and kick the door in a bit like the way that someone outside that institution will do. I think that's a big part of the problem. But, on our side, I think, is the fact that you do have a new government that considers this as not, they can fix it, but it's not really their problem yet. But it will be at some point. Lindsay says it's another money-saving exercise, quite possibly, but it's going to cost more the longer it drags on. That's the other thing they've got to try and balance. The longer this lasts, the more that a judge eventually is going to say, why did it take you that long? Why didn't you do it straight away? So that's where things are going to go, I suspect, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, there will be more stories on this coming up in the next few weeks, so don't go away. Now, on to the main story of the day, and another scandal, this one about a mouthy greengrocer called Gregg Wallace, sorry, Richard, who he's a co-presenter of the BBC show MasterChef, who last week was subjected to a torrent of accusations that started off with sexualised innuendo and has moved on to rape jokes, simulating sex acts, parading around naked with a sock on his willy, and now, to top it off, not content with employing expensive lawyers to defend his reputation, he's decided to release an Instagram video defending himself. Now, we've got some clips of it without any sound, which we can play. You'll be able to read the subtitles as we're going along. But Jason, if someone's defending themselves by attacking someone else, do they actually have a defence, do you think?
Let's start with what he says first, and then come on to why this is such a terrible PR disaster. The first thing is his words are so insulting because they imply that it was only middle-aged, middle-class women who took offence. That therefore it's acceptable that what he said because it didn't insult young women of a different background. So that's the first bit, which is just kind of incomprehensibly bad, and kind of like inexplicable as well. I mean, it shouldn't matter your age, your class, your background, your circumstance. If something's offensive, it's offensive. And if your behaviour is, as in this case, reportedly, unacceptable, it's unacceptable across the board. So that's the first bit, and you can see why people have leapt on this, because it's just probably about the most idiotic thing you could say if you're in trouble. But then there's a bit about who advises him.
Plainly nobody. This is the thing. He's put this video out, and we've all shot these videos at home for something we've had to do for the Mirror, Jason, haven't we? You'd have to do several takes because you get it wrong, or you burp in the middle, or the postman rings, right? And he's edited it. He's put subtitles on it, and he's merged 2 takes into one. He's thought about it really carefully for quite a while, and nobody at any point has said, no, maybe. He's just...
Yeah, and there are specialist agencies out there who deal in crisis management for companies and individuals in exactly this sort of circumstance, and they advise them on what to say or what not to say, which is probably actually equally more important, and how to kind of limit the fallout from the scandal he's found himself at the centre of. And I think this would be used as a kind of as a kind of a masterclass in years to come of what not to do.
It's one of those things you'll see at PR conferences, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Please, don't let your clients ever do this. Maybe the crisis PR teams don't want to be anywhere near Gregg Wallace at the moment. It's probably going to be bad for their reputations. And let's take these allegations one at a time, okay? So Gregg is suggesting these allegations that have been made against him are class-based, that they all come from middle-class people about a working-class person who is earning well, and presumably implying that, he's got above his station in some way. Get into the comments, everybody. What do you think? Do you think it's a class issue? Do you think it's because, he's this cheeky little sort of, London chappie, that that's the reason for these allegations? Steve says it's a seasonal story. He's a turkey and his career is starved.
Very good, Steve.
Well done, Steve. Top of the class. I think you may well get a News Agenda mug. If you get into the comments and message me and send me your address, you get, if you haven't already got one, a News Agenda mug for that one. The problem is, with this class issue, Jason, the BBC is full of the middle class people. According to today's papers, there were at least 4 formal complaints to the BBC management about Gregg Wallace, not one of whom, none of the people who would have dealt with those complaints is a working class person or on a working class salary. If he's been protected, employed, believed by middle class people in a statewide institution for 20 years, is it possible that people are now out to get him, do you think, on the basis that they're middle class?
No.
It's a simple answer to that one.
Well, no, because the whole premise is that his comments would be acceptable to people of different backgrounds, and that's just wrong. But because people know how to behave and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, regardless of their background.
Yeah, and running around naked with a sock on your willy is appropriate at stag do's, maybe in the privacy of your own home, but. Yeah. Not really in a TV studio. Richard says, Wallace says professional contestants are where this is at. It's the professionals, the celebrities that have complained. Will this empower regular public contestants to come forth? If not, was his lovely speak entirely out of era and he'll now dissolve away? it does seem that we've had the complaints so far have pretty much been from the celebrity contestants who are women and who are of a certain age. So let's go on to this particular aspect. And this usually means, it's a very vague term, usually means something else quite vague that you don't pin down as well, like over the hill or past it or unattractive or middle-aged or infertile, but definitely female. They never say men of a certain age, do they? Speaking as one of these women myself, I would politely point out that it is women over 40 in general who are the women most likely to no longer be putting up with any of your crap. If you find in your life, generally, it's women over 40 that are telling you to stop doing whatever it is that's silly. They're more likely to be mums. They're more likely to be secure in their careers and their own principles. And they've probably taken a fair bit of crap to do all of it and get there in the first place. And they've decided not to eat any more of it, which is why a lot of the times these scandals start with women over 40 who come forward and speak up in order to prevent other people having to go through what they did. And that in turn, as Richard suggests, enables and emboldens other women who are a little bit further down the pecking order, perhaps, to come forward and say, well, yeah, that is something that's happened to them more recently. I suppose the question is, Jason, who would you rather take on, Mike Tyson or a woman of a certain age?
Susie, you know the answer to that question.
You know what the answer better be, because I'm a woman of a certain age. That's the fact.
Yeah. And I think there's a border point, and I would need to be careful legally here of how we do this, but there's a border point about whether the management of this company, because MasterChef's made by Banjay, which is an independent company, which then sells it to the BBC, about whether they should have done more. And then there's the argument about whether the BBC should have done more. I'm always slightly worried about these because, you know, the Mail's gone studs in this morning, you know, the BBC was warned 4 times, and this story then becomes a way of attacking the BBC. But it's still a legitimate question. But you know, we saw what happened in very different circumstances. But we saw, you know, this is not, you know, just one broadcaster. The ITV had trouble last year over, you know, Philip Schofield, etc., etc. So this is not. But so the broader point is you know, the broadcasting industry is a way that they, you know, that the people who work in it are they protected properly? Is the way that, you know, what they call talent is you know, sometimes indulged when they should be called out? I think, you know, is it an industry where young people who want to get on are in some ways exploited or not listened to? And you know this as well as I do, Susie. You know, it's a highly cutthroat industry where you're warned that, you know, if you don't do what we tell you, you're not going to get a career out of it. And I think that's a bit which worries me most about this is, you know, some of the allegations that, you know, we read today of, like, you know, assistants possibly or possibly not, because it wasn't entirely clear, you know, being touched up. You know, why was that assistant, if that did actually take place, why weren't they able to call it out? Now, these are, you know, why did they not feel comfortable to be able to do that? And that's a bit which worries me most.
Yeah,
and that's not unique to this. And as I say, these are all allegations. None of it's proven yet.
Yeah, and but it's also worth saying that in his video, he doesn't seem to have actually denied doing some of the things he's alleged of, just sort of complaining about the complainants, I suppose, in a way. On Twitter, Sean says, one instance is one too many. If you wouldn't say it to your mum, don't say it. It's not difficult. Sue says, so those who are not of that age are fair game because they're not the ones who are going to complain. And Bruce says, if he's going to trot out the class trope, it's hardly surprising that a bald working class man of a certain age doesn't get why he isn't funny. And what you find funny, of course, is not what everyone else may enjoy, but it's not really an issue of just off-colour jokes. I think it seems to be a bit more to the allegations than that, and it does seem to be getting worse as things progress. And he's certainly not helping by making his own public statements. I'm sure his lawyers are on the phone to him this morning going, don't do that again, please. Now, so the question, I suppose, I mean, what do you think, everybody? Do you think what Gregg did is okay, or no, sorry, what he's alleged to have done, is okay? and that he sort of, I suppose, admitted by omission. But are you okay with some of this stuff? Have you seen it? Is it a working class issue? Is it just women of a certain age who are getting their knickers in a twist about something that doesn't matter too much? Maybe one aspect of it is that, that because it's an outside company that was making this for the BBC, there's a lot of freelancers involved. So there are lots of assistants who come in and out and go away. And maybe if you don't have to deal with Gregg Wallace on a daily basis, you wouldn't necessarily feel the need to complain because you're not going to be dealing with him again, maybe for, ever, maybe for quite a while. If it just happens to you once, then a lot of us do have to put up with stuff like that. And we have put up with stuff like that over years. And that's one of the common reasons why people don't speak out, is because you think, well, I've managed to get myself away from it, and I just hope that's not happening to someone else. Steve says non-celebrity contestants won't feel they'll be listened to and believed. It's straight out of the Savile playbook. It's not quite like Jimmy Savile, Steve, but I take your point. And it's one of those things, I think, that a woman over 40 is more likely to be believed. A woman of 20 is not going to be believed in the same way. They just aren't. I suppose the question, Jason, is from where do we go from here? It looks like the BBC is handling this the way the BBC always does. They're getting attacked by the Mail, as you say. This is a BBC scandal kind of thing. They've drawn a veil over it. They've protected the institution to some extent. That's the allegation. And then it all comes bubbling out to the surface years later, and it takes out the talent, the management, and there's an internal inquiry, some kind of row in Parliament, and it's another reason to attack the BBC. Is there an easier way, do you think, Jason, for them to handle sex scandals when they start coming their way? What would you do?
These things are so difficult, aren't they? I mean, there's kind of they're kind of damned if they do, they're damned if they don't in many respects. I mean, should there be clearer ways, better systems for whistleblowing? Yes. Should be the better systems for people to, if they feel they're being put in an uncomfortable or vulnerable position, or and actually, they are molested or hassled or whatever in the workplace, and should there be a clear way of actually being able to alert that and be listened to? Yes, those should be things that apply to every organisation which employs people. Yeah, they also, as they also have to, they rest on the principle that people are innocent until found guilty. So the fact these people are in the public eye makes it even harder, because they have they have a kind of responsibility to make sure that when these allegations are raised, that both sides get a fair hearing. That makes it hard.
Yeah, it makes it very hard, because those women have a loud voice now in their careers that they have, and in the place that they are in their careers. Yeah, and it is a bunch of them against one chap at the moment, which is definitely not something that's counting in Gregg's favour, although he's also not really helping himself, it's got to be said. Yeah. I've never understood the charms of Gregg Wallace. I don't know why he's on the television. I've never got it. I've never thought he was particularly... Someone somewhere has decided that he's televisual gold, and they keep giving him these jobs. But he's not a chef, as far as I can tell. He doesn't know anything about chefing. I think he ran a restaurant for a while, and he was a greengrocer. Why he's on MasterChef is beyond me. But MasterChef's beyond me. I hate it anyway. We'll have to see how that all pans out. I suspect by Wednesday, when we come back here for another edition of the News Agenda, there will be some Gregg Wallace developments, and we'll know a bit more about it. Right. Thank you, everyone, for taking us through that. Thank you, Jason. Now, we have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. So when the world is full of scandals, it is nice to take note of something that's going right. And today, that is Michael Cullen, also known as Speedo Mick, a former homeless drug addict, you'll just see him on the left-hand side of the screen there, who got himself clean and raised more than £1 million for charity by hiking in his Speedos in all weathers, the length and breadth of Britain. Now, he's being made subject of a new musical called The Scouse Stomper, as he rightly should be. And if the theme tune isn't These Pants Are Made for Walking, there is something wrong with the world. Jason, is this proof that even someone right at the bottom of the heap can be elevated, celebrated even, and all ills will come to an end eventually?
Yeah, it's a lovely story. It's a story of redemption, of giving back, of kindness, and wearing very small swing trunks as you run around Britain.
Yes. And he's got himself a lovely tan as a result. But, I suppose he's been remarkable. But he's walked around the length of Britain in freezing weather. I mean, look, he's wrapped up in a scarf and a hat there, but he's still wearing his Speedos. Poor bloke.
Yeah, there's going to be some good songs.
Yes, well, there's plenty of good songs.
How do you turn this into a musical? I mean, is he just running the whole time on stage?
No idea. I'm just glad they're not making a musical about the Naked Rambler, because that would be so much a different thing. What happened to him? He went quiet, didn't he? He's probably been locked up again. Right. Thank you, Jason, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Sorry, Richard, because we had to talk about things other than nuclear veterans, but such is life. We will be back again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Until then, everybody, stay safe, take care. Tatty bye.